Hello, Susan. Thank you so much for coming on to She Leads. I appreciate it, and I'm just so excited to get to know you better and hear your story. So thank you.
Of course. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So, Susan, you are currently the CEO of Edmodo, which is an education technology platform that is honestly all around the world in 180 countries, 100 million accounts that are out there for Edmodo, and I think
actually now 150.
150 million.
We're close to 150.
Insane. So incredible education platform, and we'll get to that and more so how it's dealing with COVID and everything happening now. But you are not foreign to holding a CEO role. You were a CEO of Eatwith, of Plum District, and even prior to those companies, you also held leadership roles in operations at Minted, Google, and even prior to that, you worked at eBay and held a lot of leadership roles as well as just other roles within eBay. I believe you worked there for around 5 years. So we'll get into all of that, but I'm sure you can tell, I'm very excited to just get to know you better and hear about your incredible career so far. So what I love to do, I love to start off, take me back to when you were at Harvard. So you got a bachelor's and an MBA from Harvard. So in undergrad and almost like reaching that graduation point where you were leaving college. At this moment, where did you imagine your career would go? Where did you want to go? What questions were you asking yourself? How did you navigate it?
Yeah, so I think to answer that, I start a little bit from the beginning, which is I grew up in a really small town called Newcastle, Pennsylvania, which sits about 10 minutes from the border of Ohio. So it is a kind of traditional kind of coal mining town. And growing up, my parents are first generation immigrants, so immigrated from Korea, and my dad was a doctor. And growing up, what I heard all the time was, be a doctor, because since you are, a foreigner here, you'll always look like a foreigner. Being a doctor, it's a profession and it's safe, right? And I think a lot of probably immigrants around the same time kind of probably thought really similarly. So my story is actually not super unique or uncommon. So I grew up actually my whole life thinking I was going to be a doctor.
Wow.
And then I got to Harvard and I realized really quickly that I wasn't going to be a doctor. And I actually, though, did not know what I was going to be. So that summer before my senior year in college, I thought, you know what, the default of, okay, you're an Asian kid who thought they were going to be a doctor, but very obviously not going to be a doctor, or nor do they want to continue to be in the sciences, go to law school. So I thought I was going to take the LSAT and apply to law school. So that summer, I actually stayed at home and studied for the LSAT, but the entire summer had insomnia. Because to your question of what did you think you were going to do, I had no clue.
Wow.
For the first time in my life, I had no clue, and I was terrified.
Yeah.
I literally could not sleep that summer. I was just stressing and worried. So then I got back to school, and a friend of mine, she had done a summer internship on Wall Street. And I had no idea what business or banking or any of that was. But the companies, the consulting firms and the investment banks used to come on campus to recruit. And so she told me, hey, there's like free food and alcohol, so you should just come. Yeah. I actually just tagged along with her, and this was all happening in the fall. And it turned out that I loved talking to these alums about what they did and what they were working on. And I genuinely loved just getting to know these really, people who were maybe a year or two out of college.
Yeah.
Because I was so curious, like, what does post-graduation life look like when it don't have this like set path?
Yeah.
And so I literally would be like the last person to leave, and just have these like amazing conversations, and this world of business opened up. So I went through the recruiting process, and decided to join a consulting firm. At the time, it was called Booz Allen and Hamilton, and they were one of the few large firms that, as an undergrad, you got hired into an industry practice group.
Okay.
And so for me, I got hired into the media and entertainment practice group because while I didn't know much about business, I'm a consumer of entertainment and media.
Yeah.
So I was guided at that time of what do I know I like? And so I picked a practice group covering an industry that I knew was just inherently interesting to me. So I went to go learn, and I liked the specialization. So coming out of college, I thought, okay, I'm going to learn a ton. At the time, to be honest, I hadn't even used Microsoft Excel. Like, I used Microsoft Word, but I knew I would learn a ton. I, really did see it as an adventure. And during my 3 years at Booz Allen, got to work on amazing clients. Super, super fun. And when I was leaving college, I was so excited I was going to this firm. And I thought what that meant was at some point, maybe I'll go, work at a movie studio or an entertainment company. And that's kind of what I thought leaving college.
So I love these stories because it's just so amazing coming in and how you had this different idea. So I have to ask, when you kind of started to explore business and consulting and media, what were your parents saying to you? What was in the back of your mind being like, this is not a secure job, it's not law, it's not medicine?
Oh, 100% actually. And to be honest, when I broke the news to my parents, and this would have been in my junior year of college, I remember I burst into tears breaking the news to them, because my entire life had always been about making them proud of me, And so I remember when I, had my job and I was buying suits, and my parents kept asking me, so what do you do? And I would kind of give them the pitch of, we work with clients and we, problem solve and do analysis. And I remember my dad saying, why would they listen to you?
Oh my goodness.
and then when I try to further explain, I'm like, but there's a team and there's like a partner and etc.
Yeah.
I remember my dad saying, okay, well then what exactly do you do? Like, you actually go into the office and then what do you do? I was like, I go.
Incredible.
It was just really hard to kind of explain. So I think my parents were just like, kind of like, The only time I think they realized, maybe this isn't such a bad path was that, and this was again like mid to late 90s. My client, I was on a client assignment in LA for about a year, and they upgrade all the consultants to whatever frequent flyer status, and so we would upgrade all the time to like first class. And so my parents, realizing that I'm flying every week to LA in first class, they were like, oh. So it was actually the airline status that kind of made my parents think, this might be a legitimate job.
They'd be like, okay, yeah, she's doing well. She's doing just fine. Oh my God, that's amazing. So jumping into this, so we can move on and kind of go into, so right now you're in entertainment. Was this, at this point, do you think, okay, this is like the rest of my career, I could stay in entertainment, or how did this progress? Like, where were you like, oh no, I think it's time for me to even explore somewhere else?
So I definitely liked the entertainment aspect. I thought, I did think that this is probably where I was going to stay. But a funny thing happened in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I remember this story. It's vivid. It's like printed in my brain. I was in New York, I was in Manhattan, and this bus drove by. And on the side of the bus, it said Amazon, the world's largest bookstore or something like that. And I just remember like, and that was the rise of the first wave of the internet. So Internet 1.0, I guess. And I remember there was a friend of mine who, she lived in New York, grew up in New York, and she was at Goldman Sachs at the time. And I remember going to her goodbye party because she was moving to California, and she was joining a startup called eBay. And I remember thinking, why would you do that? But more and more, there was this kind of, it was a bit of the wild, wild west. And there were so many, it was this sort of uncharted territory, and there was such opportunity. And around that time, there was like such and such.com raised this much money, or such and such company.com going public. And I remember thinking, And so I did get a friend of mine that I knew when I was an undergrad had moved back home to San Diego, and with his high school friend. And his high school friend had started a company, 2 companies actually, iBaby.com and iMaternity.com, and it sold it to iVillage right before iVillage's IPO. Okay. And now was starting his 3rd venture with my friend Jerry. And so Jerry had reached out to me asking if I wanted to move out to California and run marketing. And I remember I was like, sure, when you're young and not tied down, it's like, okay, this, at the time I was like, sure. And my parents were like, are you crazy? Because I think at the time, typically, by that time I'd done 3 years in consulting, and typically you apply to business school. And I think my parents thought, well, go back to grad school. But instead I took this detour and headed out west. And I mean, it was a crazy time when you think about the amount of money raised by 20-somethings. Yeah. And I remember just every company, I said, the company was called iHome.com. And I remember just being on the phone and people just like bending over backwards to partner with us or to work. Wow. They had never heard of our company, but again, it was just we were a .com. And then the market crashed in April market crashed April 2000. Mm-hmm. And I remember it was like night and day. And all of a sudden we dropped the .com from our name. We were trying to pivot it. And it was just really, it was a huge market. It was a market correction. And that's when I decided to apply to business school. I was like, I'm going to hang out somewhere else. Yeah. And I remember thinking that there was, especially when I went to business school, there was no way I would ever go back into a startup or back to the internet. That's what I said when I went back to business school.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so
famous last words. Lesson in life: never say never, and don't think that you know where you're going, because life always throws different curveballs. Oh my
God, that's amazing! What a story! I would have just to experience that when everything is the .com starting everything. That's amazing. So we'll move. Okay, I can go into so many directions, honestly. But when you look at that time in your life, and you look at like these 20s, and you're really like taking every opportunity as it comes, and you just have this excited energy. What advice can you give? Like looking back, would you do it all the same? Would you alter it a bit? Like what advice can you give someone who's right now in this time, just leaving college and having these opportunities or whatnot?
Yeah, with 100% honesty, I would say I don't regret any of the decisions, regardless of if they were good ones. Yeah. Because if you're led by genuinely go to what you're interested in. So for me, it was, initially coming out of college, picking Booz Allen was about, hey, I really love this entertainment and media business. I actually don't know anything about it, but I love the output of it.
Amazing.
And go to where you think you're going to learn the most. And what augments learning is if you're genuinely interested in the subject matter. Right. So I think those 2 things, if you do those, everything works out. And again, that might sound a little like Pollyannish, but I think that if you're just guided by certain things, like this genuine kind of authentic thirst for knowledge, and what environments will you actually learn the most in? And I think over the years, what I've added to that is, are you genuinely interested in the topic matter? And then also who you're around matters too. Like, who are you going to learn from? Yeah. Right? What environment are you going to learn the best in? Where you can be your authentic, genuine self. And whether it's finding the right role models, finding the right peer group. Yeah. You mentioned that I had various roles at eBay. Yeah. And to this day, I would say eBay is still one of my most favorite treasured work experiences. That in the 5 years I was there, not a single day went by where it just felt like work. It was a pleasure every day. Like I remember on Sunday nights looking forward to Monday because I got to go in. And the reason for that, this is eBay in the early 2000s. Yeah. and eBay had gone public in 98, I think. But the people who were at eBay during that time are still the most incredible people that I'll ever meet. Still great friends with them, still see them. But it's being at a company and that was growing so quickly. We were all aligned around the singular mission, which was we were using technology to create opportunity for anyone to make a living. So we called it like democratizing e-commerce, right? And internally, we would talk a lot about leveling the playing field so that the little guy can compete side by side with like the Walmarts of the world. And that was incredibly inspiring and motivating. And so the types of people that eBay attracted at the time are just amazing. And they've all gone on to do amazing things. Just whether it was, when I joined, Meg Whitman was the CEO. Jeff Jordan, who's now at Andreessen Horowitz, was managing the U.S. business. The general manager of the U.S. business is a gentleman named Michael Deering, who to this day is still like probably the smartest person I've ever met. And I oftentimes will go to him for advice. And the peer group, honestly, like I laughed my ass off like every single day. So I think and when I think about how much I learned probably more at eBay than I did in business school or anything prior to that, because again, it goes back to the subject matter was so interesting. I was surrounded by great people. I felt like I could bring my authentic, true self. I was in an environment that set up for learning, and the things I learned at eBay, I carry with me through every work experience that I've had. So, for example, the notion of really, when you think about businesses, whether you're small or big, the notion of focus, prioritization, allocating your resources and your effort on the one or two things that are going to move the needle. Those things like really resonate. The balance of, listening to direct customer feedback, but at the same time, looking at what users are actually really need versus what they say they need. Because oftentimes they're very different, right? But what does it mean to be user focused without just blindly listening to the users? How do you create new markets and new opportunities? And so those lessons I learned a lot about during my time at eBay. When I left eBay to go to Google, I actually went with a specific thing that I wanted to learn. What I wasn't getting at eBay that I was going to immediately get at Google. But I knew back then, and I didn't say it actually, I wasn't brave enough to actually say what I wanted to be. I left eBay because at the time I thought, I want to go to a smaller company. I want to go to a startup. But I couldn't kind of align, they're in an industry that I'm really passionate about, and they have a team that I love. Like I couldn't really get that to align. But what I knew at the time was I knew I wanted to be a CEO, but I was too chicken to say it. So, but I knew inside that in order to be, whether it's a good leader or CEO or whatever, you have to know how to manage a team. And at eBay, I was, I'd held chief of staff roles. I was, lone wolf, and I would get kind of parachuted in to, fix and solve problems. And while that's like super interesting, I wasn't going to get the chance to really start scaling leadership and impact. And what does it mean to like manage a team and to lead a team? So at Google, I left to join their operations team, which, to be honest, when they first reached out to me, I thought, operations, does that mean like site ops, like network ops, like keeping the site up? And I thought, I don't know anything about that. Operations at Google is essentially customer support. And I originally was like, I'm a product marketer. But stepping into Google, and I originally joined the Google Apps consumer operations team. So all of the free suite of products at Google, Gmail, et cetera, Calendar, was managing those teams. And I was going to have the opportunity from the get-go to have quite a large team and to manage managers. And I learned a ton about managing.
So
during I look at Google, that was like management boot camp.
Wow. Yeah. So, okay, I have to ask, you said you were too afraid to say that you want to be a CEO, but you knew inside. Was there anything else you did to kind of put that into fruition? Like, did you write it down somewhere? Like, how, was it kind of just this thing in your back of your mind? Like, this is the
chicken.
angle.
It was in the background, and I was too chicken.
Wow. Okay.
To even say it out loud. So when I would, go on interviews and people would ask me, "Oh, what do you want to do?" And I'd always kind of talk around it and say, "Well, I want to be a general manager." And I remember getting pushback where people were like, "What does that mean?" Yeah. Wow. And I think it's because I did, at eBay I had a lot of different roles. Yeah. And I actually liked the different roles and looking at all the different levers that move, in particular, technology business. Mm. And there's something about the aggregation of all of that that I really loved, And so when I left eBay, this would have been in 2008, I would talk to startups. And at the time, startups are looking almost for specialists, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, do you code? Are you a performance marketer? Yeah. Are you business development? And was like, sort of. There wasn't anything that I went super deep in. Yeah. But I knew because I wanted to manage all of that. Yeah. And so, that's a good question. Like, I didn't really manifest it anywhere. I didn't really write it down. But I knew that there were things that I needed to keep learning, right. And for me, it was the people management piece.
So when I got to Google, I managed the Google Apps team, and then there was an opportunity to move over to commerce, which is kind of, to be honest, is like my first love. Yeah. And it also just happened that my old boss, Stephanie Telenius, had just joined Google and was the VP of commerce for product management. Yeah. And so I moved over to Google Commerce, and I had the ops team there. And when I left the Google Apps, I had a team of about 50. When I joined Google Commerce, it was a team of about 15, a half of which the very first day told me they were moving to different parts of the company, because Google Commerce at the time was a combination of, do you remember Frugal? Probably not. And Google Base? Probably not. Or Google Checkout, right? Okay. No, because those were not very successful products. So at Google, you want to work on the brand new sexy, right? Yeah. And my products were it. However, Google had just reorged into 7 focus areas, commerce being one of them. And so I had the opportunity to really work cross-functionally with product management and engineering and marketing. And so I actually grew the Google Commerce Ops team from 15, which was actually quickly going to become 7, to, by the time I left 3 years later, we were over 200 people in we're in Asia, Europe, and the U.S.
Oh, I could definitely understand why you view it as a boot camp for management and everything. That's
totally right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like managing managers and how do you scale? Like I've always sort of naturally gravitated towards I'm good one-on-one. Yeah. But then how do you affect change one to many, and also not directly, where you've got layers of management underneath you, and so learning, for example, so Jonathan Rosenberg, who ran product at the time, he had this mantra where he said, repetition doesn't kill the prayer, which was when you communicate, succinct and repeat. Yeah. Because just because you said something once doesn't mean that it's absorbed. And I remember, I still say that to this day, like repetition doesn't kill the prayer. And again, just like learning so much about just the rhythms of management and the cadence and the level of communication. I did learn a lot. Now, when I left Google, it was really, I felt like, God, Google was, when I told you when I left eBay, I wanted to go somewhere smaller. Google was like 10x the size of eBay. And I think for me, just feeling like this small cog in this huge wheel. Yeah. I had my first child at eBay. I had my second child at Google. And I think especially when you turn into a parent, mm-hmm. and I'm making the decision to leave my cute babies at home to go do something, it's got to be something where I feel like I matter and that I'm making a difference. And as much as I liked Google, and the consistency of talent at Google is so amazing, I did feel like this small cog in a really big machine. And I felt like I wanted to go at that point, really, I wanted to go somewhere smaller where what I did really mattered. And so I left and went to Minted.
So, okay. So after Minted, going from, tell me about the experience getting your first CEO position at, I believe, Plum District. Was that So kind of, tell me about that transition from going into an operational role and having that to now being what you've always had in your mind, in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
Challenges away in that transition as well that you could learn from.
Yeah. So and I think this is also the power of having authentic communication and conversations. And Maggie Wilderotter, who is on the board of Costco and Lyft, I got to go to an event where she was speaking, and she actually figures later actually into the story and why I'm actually at Edmodo. But she talked about building your she called it base of power, which is you make connections not only within the company that you're in, but even outside of the company. And my transition from Minted to my first CEO job really actually had to do with the fact that I had a friend who I used to work with at eBay. She had a friend who was a New York-based investor who was a board observer at Plum District. And he had contacted me. We became friends because he had contacted me for one of his very first investments, but it required an international move, which I couldn't entertain. But, we really hit it off. And so when Plum District was looking for a new CEO, he literally called me, and he called me on Friday. It was a Friday, and asked me, "Do you want to be a CEO of Plum District?" Because when we were talking about this other role, he knew what I wanted. At that time, I'd finally got brave enough to actually say out loud what I wanted. He called me. This was on a Friday. On Monday, I talked on the phone with Aileen Lee, who is now at Cowboy Ventures, but was the partner who led the investment in Plum District for Kleiner. I talked to her on Monday. On Wednesday, that was on the phone. I met with Aileen and Amy Vance at Comcast Ventures on Wednesday. On Thursday, I talked with Neil Sakara at General Catalyst. Again, these are the board members of Plum District. On Thursday, they gave me the offer on Friday, and I started on Monday.
Wow.
And it was actually really interesting because when I left Minted and I took some time off, I was getting some advice from a woman named Lorna Bornstein, who is the founder and CEO of Grucker. And she was at eBay prior. Again, like the eBay network, alumni network, is fantastic. Wow. So Lorna had given me advice saying, for whatever role you want, talk to people who are currently in that role and get good advice, which is, again, fantastic advice.
Yeah.
And she pinged me and said, "Hey, do you want to talk to my friend? He's a partner at a VC firm, because he's always looking to meet operators in the Valley."
Yeah.
I'm not going to say his name because, to be honest, he's a little bit of a interesting character. And I went to this VC firm to go talk to him. And I remember I thought, oh, he just wanted to get to know people. But it almost felt like I was being interrogated like an interview. Mm-hmm. And his questions were, well, you're at Minted for less than a year. Why did you stay for such a short time? But he was like kind of peppering me. And I don't know whether that's his style, because he's actually, I've heard he's quite a lovely person. But in this meeting, he was like being very aggressive. And I was a little kind of taken aback. And he goes, because you know what? In fact, I actually showed your resume to someone else at another firm. And we both agreed that we would never hire you because like you had left Minted after less than a year, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember just being so taken aback. And then he was also the one who was peppering like, well, what do you want to be? And I was like, a general manager. And he's like, well, what is that? That doesn't mean anything. I felt so like, okay. And I remember like getting into the elevator, going to get my car. And literally as I'm pulling out of the garage is when my friend Ben called and asked me if I wanted to be the CEO of Plum District. It like in that moment. So it was actually kind of a funny course of events.
Amazing. What a story. So
yeah.
I guess so I can go in a couple different ways, but I am interested kind of getting that doubt from that partner and really having this where, okay, he obviously doesn't believe in me and doesn't see my potential. How did you deal with that? Did you kind of did that motivate you more? And really, how do you deal with people maybe who like view you as a female and are considering other male counterparts for the CEO position and like balancing that?
I think it's hard to be human and not let something like that shake you a bit, right? I think it's very human to have, and I think I'm just going to generalize. I do think as women, there's a lot more self-doubt, right?
Yes.
Which if you look at the data, for example, like women in promotions, like we wait till we know we've nailed like 10 out of 10 things before asking for the promotion, right? Versus men who are like, I got maybe one of those, but I think I should anyway.
Yeah. And you can even think that with applying for jobs. I've talked about this on other episodes where we see like a whole list of skills and we're like, oh no, we don't have like 3 of them, we won't apply.
Totally.
Whereas like guys would be like, oh, I have that one skill, that's enough for me to apply. So it's definitely applicable in many scenarios. So
totally. And I would say that again, it did shake me. I was like, oh my gosh, especially when he like made the comment about, I was showing this to another partner at another VC. And I just remember like, oh my gosh, I think I was just so surprised. In some ways, I wonder if he was just testing me, right? Who knows?
Yeah.
But I do think that one of the things in general that I took away from that experience, it also helped that like within about 30 minutes, I got a phone call offering me a CEO job. But like in that span, I do remember the overriding emotion of that I was going to prove him wrong, Yeah. And I think that it has to do with enjoying the feeling of being the underdog. So in general, I think I've always empathized with underdogs, and I think partly it's like being an immigrant growing up in the middle of nowhere. For me, like if I think back to like coming from where I grew up and getting into Harvard, I don't think I ever really doubted it. But now looking back, I'm like, I don't know how I got in. I really don't. Because like when I got to Harvard and I met, these amazing people, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing here? But I do think that I like, and I've always empathized with being an underdog, and that being doubted makes you better, right? And it gives you motivation. So like whether it's on TV, and I think everyone likes the underdog story. Like there's whole movies about it. Like there's that movie called Rudy, right? With Sean Astin, where it's like the underdog. And so I think that was kind of the overarching reaction to hearing that phrased in such an aggressive.
And I think, Susan, what you bring up such a valuable lesson here, that a lot of people, they can see themselves as the underdog, but they let that eat them in a way. Like Whereas like the mindset of being like, okay, I'm the underdog, like I could prove them wrong. And I think that's a valuable lesson in anything you pursue in life. Like whether you are the underdog or not, just having that ability to be like, okay, I'm motivated to show whoever doubts me. So
and in fact, I actually say being the underdog is a pretty enviable position, because it's much easier to come from behind than to stay out in front all the time. Right?
So being the CEO at 3 different companies now, what can you say are like the 3 most valuable skills to be an effective and powerful, and not even just effective and powerful, but just a CEO that really people love working for, and they feel excited to go to work like you did at eBay, and excited on Sunday night. So what have you learned?
I would say, and this doesn't just apply to a CEO role, but I think in just all roles, no matter where you are, no matter what industry is, I'm going to call it authenticity, right? Is just being really comfortable in your skin, like the good, the bad, and the ugly, and accepting all of that, and why authenticity, and I'm going to apply it in the CEO role, why that's so important. And I actually kind of generalize it to just all management roles in particular, is that a company is more than just one person, right? A company is not just the CEO, it's an entire team.
Yeah.
And as a CEO, I am I need to inspire a team. I need to create a culture of teamwork, of emotional safety, so that I can bring out the best in each person. And that 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't just equal 3, but like it can equal 10, right? So to do that, you need to be able to make connections and lead by example. And again, I think when that comes from an authentic place, I think then it doesn't feel like work, you know? I think the second piece too is, and it goes back to the people aspect, people, your employees are your most valuable asset. It's not the IP, it's not, you know, whatever technology, it's your employees. And, you know, on that front, I think it's really being able to understand people, understand what motivates people. Listening is really important, and developing people, right? And then developing managers who can then in turn develop. And I think one of the things that I think about a lot in the CEO role is, and again, this doesn't just apply to a CEO role, I think it's really for any kind of management role, is focus on working yourself out of a job, you know, because by doing so, you don't want to be the single point of failure. You don't want to be, like I've seen, and I'm kind of saying this right now sometimes people, when they're nervous, they are trying to preserve their job, so they don't share any information. They want it so that you can't get rid of them, right?
Yeah.
That may work in the short term, but it certainly doesn't work in the long term, you know? And I think that by the working yourself out of the job, the reason for that is that business is not static. It changes constantly, right? And I think one of the best pieces of advice was I got at eBay was Maynard Webb, who at the time was the COO. I remember he came to talk to our team, and he drew this 2x2 matrix. Mm-hmm. On one axis was time. It was like urgent, non-urgent, or short-term, long-term. Yeah. And then on the other axis was let's call it, I can't remember what exact terms he used, but it was like strategic versus tactical.
Okay.
And as employees or as managers or whatever that is, we spend the bulk of our time dealing with tactical, urgent issues, like in that bottom left quadrant.
Yeah.
Where we will make a bigger impact on our teams, our companies, on our own lives is focusing on the non-urgent strategic issues.
Wow.
Right? And so that's where, by working yourself out of a job, you can then spend time on that part. And that's where like game-changing stuff comes out of, right?
Yeah.
And so I think about that a lot. And so if I want to work myself out of a job, I need to build leadership bench strength, right? I need to be able to bring in great leaders or develop great leaders who in turn work themselves out of a job. So I say that to my direct reports all the time, you know, like, how do you work yourself out of a job? And so I think that part, you know, back to people, et cetera, is important. And so you had said 3. So you said authenticity, work yourself out of a job, or / people.
I think that's so valuable. Like those 2 are incredible, better than 10 like mediocre ones. So really, no, I think that's so valuable that a lot of people, like you said, doesn't have to be a CEO, but any leader, just motivating your team and wanting them to be the best. So they're
Oh, I do have a third one for you.
Okay, go ahead.
I would call that for CEO, it's about being a servant leader, right? They talk about servant leader, and I'm serving, you know, our customers, I'm serving the employees, I'm serving the company, and really also like thinking about it from that standpoint. Yeah. And I think these all combine. So frankly, the 3 that I just said to you, they're actually all interrelated and could effectively be kind of the same thing. But, you know, if you are serving your customers and if you're serving your team,
you
know, I think you're putting yourself last, right? And I think that's what it is. Sometimes I think, and it goes back to authenticity, I think some people want a CEO job because they're like, well, I want to be the most important person at the company, or I want to do it for XYZ reason. And I don't think, again, that leads to good outcomes.
Yeah.
So I would say that probably the servant leadership.
That's great. So, okay, Susan, I honestly could have a 2-hour interview with you, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna ask you the 2 fun questions.
Okay.
So first, what's a passion or hobby that you have that's just completely unrelated to your work?
Okay, I kind of have 2.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm a dilettante, but I get into phases where I go super deep and I like geek out and I like read everything I can and I learn.
Yeah.
And so, prior to more recently during this shelter in place, is poker. I love poker.
I love it.
There's a lot of life lessons in there that I play poker. More recently during shelter in place, I've gotten obsessed with this notion of becoming fluent in Korean. Wow. So I grew up hearing my parents speak Korean and I answered in English.
Okay.
But there's something about using my brain now I feel like new neural pathways are getting reconnected by just using my brain to learn Korean. But I am obsessed about that.
That's great. And then, okay, last question. What is a fun or weird talent that no one really knows about? So I'm going to go first. Okay. So what I do is I throw blueberries into my mouth. Okay. So here we go. All right. Here we go. There we go.
Wow. Very nice.
Thank you. It's years of practice. All right. What's your hidden talent?
Okay. So my hidden talent is I can imitate the sound of a person stuck in a closet. It's very random. And actually there's some actor who has that was like their hidden talent. And I started laughing because I was like, they copied me. And I can't remember who the actor is. But
so A, where did you discover this? And B, do you want to give us a little preview?
I will give you a demonstration of it. I actually discovered I could do this when I was a teenager.
Oh my God.
And I don't remember how it came up. My cousin and I were watching something and then we were both like, oh, I want to try that. Okay. So I'm going to demonstrate my talent. Ready?
That is amazing. Oh my God. I love it.
I carried a Zoom, but that's my party trick.
I very much appreciated every second of that. So thank you. So, okay, Susan, I just want to say thank you so much. I learned so much from you, and just talking about your career and even starting off at Harvard thinking you're going to be a doctor. All of it is just so valuable.
No, and Carly, thank you for doing this. I think you're very inspiring. I think it makes me feel a lot of comfort in the future.
No, thank you.